From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.
Racism is steeped into the very core of this country. And now, in 2020, Black voices are tired of being ignored, muffled, and killed. Millions of Americans are demonstrating, protesting to make their voices heard, especially Black Americans. A movement has to arise from the ashes of the moment. From Moment to Movement is a series of one-on-one truth-telling conversations with the Black community, aimed at working towards addressing police brutality and changing systemic racism.
Hi, I'm Tamara Banks, and this is the broadcast premiere of From Moment to Movement, a platform for Black voices to be heard, unfiltered, and uncensored. We're experiencing an important moment. As recently as the beginning of this year, it wasn't too popular to have tough, honest conversations about police brutality or to organize and protest against systemic racism. But in the spring, we saw not days, but weeks of demonstrations. From Moment to Movement aims to provide a platform for Black voices. Well, it's not the Black community's responsibility to educate white people. From Moment to Movement will provide information on resources for white folks who want to learn how to engage in thoughtful, meaningful, respectful conversations with African Americans. Get educated on things like Jim Crow. Understand how systemic racism really works, and hear from people who will share dehumanizing experiences. We'll talk about racial battle fatigue, white fragility, and discuss how the system is built around whiteness. What you're about to hear are passionate, heartfelt thoughts and feelings and real life stories. We start with Brandon Carter, a director of photography for Very Productions. He was born in Kentucky and raised in Boulder, Colorado. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. So we're, as I said, in this moment where we've got lots of videotape of incidents of unarmed Black men and women being killed by primarily white police officers, but also Black police officers. Then the subsequent rallies, protests, riots, funerals, demonstrations. I want to ask you, how is this moment that we're going through in America and really across the world, how are you feeling about it?
I mean, how am I feeling about it? It's overwhelming, first and foremost, to just go through this over and over again, and seeing so many people have to suffer through the same exact situation that our grandfathers and grandmothers suffered through. It's strange to feel like it was over, but it's just beneath the surface for so many people, and it makes it hard to want to leave the house, So it's a bit overwhelming.
Say more about that, about the fear of leaving the house. What are your fears?
It's just hard to think that you could just be walking down the street doing absolutely nothing, and someone can call the cops on you and say that you're a threat while you're taking a morning walk, right? That's just unfathomable to me, that to leave my house, to go outside, to go for what would be, not like a relaxing state. I have to just be heightened at all times and make sure that I'm not being a threat, and make sure that my hands or my pockets are out of my pockets, or that I'm walking big, or that I'm walking small. And it's just a lot to have to deal with all the time. And it's not a new thing. It's something I've been dealing with, since I was a little kid. Your parents tell you how to act when you go in society so that people don't perceive you as a threat. And now it's like all this work that we've been doing for forever just seems to be, it's for something, but it's like people are just finally waking up to the fact that, okay, it is happening.
You know, you're raising an interesting point. I've heard a number of people over the past few weeks say, wow, racism is really picking back up again. And wow, it just wasn't this bad, a couple of years ago. I always say racism has never left this country. In fact, it was part of its foundation when Africans were brought to this country as products, as livestock, if you will, to help build this country. Can you talk a little bit about your reaction when somebody says, wow, I didn't know that this was happening and it's just popping up all of a sudden?
My reaction to people who think that racism it was over, right? Or where's this coming from? Because I thought we were past it. It's strange because they don't have to deal with it every day.
I think it's interesting that, like you said, people are saying it's just has happened over the past couple of years or so, and yet for not the prevalence of cell phones, everybody's got a cell phone, right? So that means
Yeah,
everybody's
yeah,
got a camera. And so that's
yeah,
why we're actually seeing what we as a Black community have always known for 400 years. And now finally the white community is saying, oh, maybe it wasn't your fault. Maybe you were just walking down the street. Maybe you were just jogging, or maybe you were just trying to bird watch. Can you
yeah,
give me some examples of some of the experiences you've had in that realm?
yeah. So it's interesting, right? It's like you grow up in a city. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is a primarily, white city, maybe one of the most white cities in America per capita, essentially. And so you grow up with people treating you differently and asking you where you're from everywhere you go. Every time you show up in a space, where are you from? Where are you from?
Hmm.
Does your so it's you're always having to justify where you fit in and why you're there and what you're doing there, and like, do you even have the skills to hold a water bottle? The way that people treat you, like you can't do anything everywhere you go. And this has been ingrained in me since I was a small child, raised in a school system where I'm the only person that is from Kentucky. Who's I'm not the only black person in the school, but in my entire going from school from second grade or from first grade in Colorado to high school, there was like less than 25 black people I went to school with my entire time.
Hmm.
So people always would say, "Oh, let me touch your hair," and all these dumb cliches when they're trying to get you to fit into their box so they can understand you. But the only thing they need to understand is that you're unique, just like they're unique, and our differences make us beautiful, and that's okay. You know?
What does that feel like to constantly sort of be on the end of having to explain who you are, why you are, where you are? It almost feels to me exhausting. How about you?
Yeah. It feels tiring to explain to everyone to justify your existence just for wanting to sit in a chair, just for wanting to be in a store. It's so hard to want to walk into a big box department store when as soon as you go in there, people are going to assume that you're trying to steal something, or assume that you're not from there, or assume you're trying to hustle them. It's just bizarre because you can see on people's face when you're like just being open and honest about what you're looking for. Like, I just need this basic item, and you go to the store to buy a basic item, and they're like trying to qualify you to see if you can afford a box of paper towels, and it's like, all I'm trying to do is buy a basic necessity, and you're trying to question my bank account. You're trying to question, should I be there? You're trying to question, why would I be there? You're trying to question what neighborhood I'm from. And it's just like all these different things make it so tiring to like want to go out of the house, to make it tiring to want to make friends with people. And, you know, it's just daunting, to think that every single person that I interact with who is not brown, and even brown people, we're going to hate each other, and people are going to try to meter where they think I should be in society. People are going to try to meter whether they think that I am, all these things that they think that I am, even though they have no idea who I am as a person, except for I have skin that's darker than theirs.
Mhm.
That's it. So since my skin is darker than theirs, I have a whole list of different experiences that they think, oh man, what did he go through when he was a little kid? It must have been terrible. Oh my God. So it's like they stack these things up of why brown people and people of color can't just exist, you know?
And a lot of assumptions that are made about your own experience. You know, when you're talking about, Brandon, microaggressions, I think is the term.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen in videos, in the news and on YouTube and social media platforms are actual killings. Obviously, that is the epitome of aggression. But these microaggressions are very painful and hurtful as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at look at how microaggressions stack up. You're in a park, you see someone with their dog off leash, and you're trying to watch birds, and you say, "Hey, can you please not break the rules because I want to watch the birds?" Then someone takes their microaggression and says to you, "No, you're not going to tell me what to do in the situation. I'm going to call the police and say X, Y, Z, say that an African American male is threatening me," right? An African American male. That concept makes you a liberal if you're going to go ahead in your brain and separate what you're calling someone, and you're going to say that they're African American versus black or other racial slurs you choose to use. The frame of your microaggression is so deep inside your brain you can't even get it out, right? I've had people for the past 2 weeks texting me and calling me and apologizing for things that they've said, and happy that I've called them out on in the past, right? But it's just crazy that everyone has these microaggressions stacked up and these biases, and even black people. And we have biases against ourselves. We have biases against women. We have biases against men, right? But we have to learn that our biases exist, and we have to learn how to quell them, because everybody has a terrible day. Everybody stubbed their toe. Everyone can relate to this universal experience of what it is to be a person and have people not think of you. But we have to really have that empathy and that compassion for everyone around us. I mean, it's just like Martin said, right? It's like hate cannot drive out hate. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can drive out hate. So we have to focus on showing people that we're all beautifully different and flawed in the same exact ways. And we all have different paths in life, and we all have different experiences. And that's what makes this human tapestry work so well, is that, you know, it's a gift that that we are alive right now. It's a gift that our ancestors made it through all the BS that they made it through their entire lives. The fact that we can be here to this day, and it's not just slavery. It's, I mean, all kinds of atrocities have happened to all of our families on all different, on every level you can imagine. You know, from trauma when you're a little kid to trauma when you're an adult to just even watching your grandparents fade from this life, because we don't know how to have compassion and be present in the moment in our society. So that's what we have to do, is we have to just learn how to let everyone experience what they need to experience, and learn that love and light is the only thing that we can do to drive out this ignorance, because you can't sit here and try to explain someone who's ignorant out of ignorance. It doesn't work. Ignorance out of ignorance, it doesn't work. So you have to learn how to come to people where they're at, and bring it down and be like, yo, we're just people, just like you're just a person.
Right. Let me ask you just one last question, Brandon. What is it that you want America to hear from you? We've gone from kneeling, peaceful protesting, demonstrating, to riots, and people feel that they're just not heard. What would you like America to hear from you today?
It's a tough question. I mean, I just want everyone to realize that everyone deserves the right and the compassion of just existing in our society, and being treated not just equally, but treating people as special, and treating people as they are a part of something greater, and that we all need each other together. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know what I want people to say, or what people to hear from me. I mean, it's just that we're all unique, and we're all on these different journeys, and we all have similarities. You know, just by admitting that we're all here on a journey, and we don't know what we're doing, and we know that we're suffering together. That's it. and that suffering is a part of life, and getting it to deal with that is a hard thing to do. I mean, each breath that we take is precious, and we have to learn that we have to share these resources together. And if that resource is time, if that resource is food, if that resource is water, whatever, we have to work together, because this is a closed ecosystem. We're on a spaceship called Earth, right? We have a limited number of resources. We have to work together. And if we don't work together, then we as a people will not last. Another group will rise up, another faction will rise up, but we have to literally just work together and not try to control each other. It's like everybody's out here living their own messed up life. And it's like, why is our life messed up? It's because we're not working together. It's like we have to learn how to be a person. We have to learn how to be people. We have to learn how to just accept people and let people grow. And even though it's hard to do that, it's like we have to let people do that, and eventually people will come together. I don't know. I'm just doldering here. I don't know. I'm making up new words.
That's okay. I think at this point we need
Yeah.
some new words, new strategies, and new approaches, because the way we've been operating is not sustainable.
Unpacking the invisible knapsack of white privilege in our society is very difficult. Go pick up a package of Band-Aids. What color are they? They don't look like my skin, right? So it's just like the oppression starts very, 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 very early. I mean, it starts when you're a baby and you're crying and they put a pacifier in your mouth. Instead of telling you to listen to your feelings, people tell you to shut up. So when you're a Black person, or you're a woman, or you're subjugated and you're not at the top of the pyramid, everyone's going to tell you to shut up and not listen to your feelings. So it's like, if we're going to tell people to shut up and not listen to their feelings, what do you think is going to happen? We're going to have incels, we're going to have racism, we're going to have violence, and we're going to have pillaging. I mean, that's what's happening. It's like, if you tell people to shut up and that they're not worthy, they're going to show you how unworthy they are. They're going to show you how you're not listening to them. And it's just simple, cause and effect. If it's just that simple, but it's so simple, the concept of simplex, and you can't understand. It's so simple, it's simplex, because it's complicated, because it's so simple to understand that the first step in your journey is by taking your first step. It's not about planning for what you're gonna do when you get to the summit. It's about taking your first step. And the first step has to be realizing that the psychological oppression that we all suffer through as human beings, as Americans, as citizens of this globe, of whatever your document says, is all oppression. How do you deal with this? I'm asking you.
You're asking me, how do I deal with it?
How do you deal with this? Because you know this stuff. You've been in the game forever.
Yeah. A whole lot of getting prayed up, remembering who I am and whose I am, right?
Yeah.
I know who I am, and I know whose I am. That helps, but it's still, it still gets you. And when you are a journalist on the front lines, and you're being told to, you're being attacked, or being pulled off certain stories over the years, well, how could I be unbiased covering a story about the KKK rallying at the Capitol? Well, how can my white male colleague, if you're going to use that schematic, be unbiased covering Juneteenth? I mean, if that's the mechanism by which you want to judge who's going to be unbiased and who's not. And by the way, what does unbiased mean? Whose list of adjectives do we use? And those adjectives and those descriptions come from a white mainstream construct that that's what they mean by being unbiased. Calling out a nation leader for what he is and being wrong is not taking a side. It's being truthful and honest and reporting information that's critical and needed to the American people. That's how I deal with it.
Yeah. It's such a strange struggle, because it's like, I don't know, we don't know each other, but I used to do a radio show on KGNU when I was 15 in Boulder.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I started getting exposed to all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Democracy Now, and all these different concepts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now it's to the point where it's like, this is exactly what Noam Chomsky was talking about.
That's right.
This is exactly what Howard Zinn was talking about, right? And so it's like, now what do we do? Like, people have been trying to like peel people's eyes open so they can see.
Mhm.
But now it's like, we can see, but now it's like, what will the public do with the knowledge that they can see? They've seen police brutality against old white people. They've seen cops have no knock warranted in the wrong house on hundreds and hundreds of occasions, and then killed people sleeping in their beds. There's no justification for that except for you're scared, which is a great just, I was scared. And then no one can prosecute me, right? So it's like, how do we take the knowledge? To be biblical, we've all taken the fruit of knowledge now with this knowledge and seeing how putrid our society treats people who are disenfranchised, how we all ignore homeless people on the street. Every single chance we get, we avoid them
Mm-hmm.
the same way that we have been avoided.
Yep.
So what do we do?
Right. The
You know?
time of being invisible is gone. The time is now to be seen and to be heard. And if a peaceful protest by kneeling or holding up signs that say Black Lives Matter, I can't breathe, don't shoot, are agitating, and you want to shut it down, well, then the next step is what comes with that. And the
Yeah.
voices get louder. But here on this show, we hope to be able to provide that platform. I think a lot of people are ready to listen. A lot of white liberals who thought they knew what was going on, their eyes are being opened up as well. So
I look at my phone real quick. Literally this morning at 6:49 a.m. Thank you for that time you called me out for the justification because I dated a black guy once. I now realize how unfortunate and ignorant it was. I didn't know then how much I contributed to systematic racism. Thank you for the call and grace you show me in this friendship for our chats, which I hold dear. It's like,
nice. Yeah.
it's just funny.
Like you said, sometimes people just don't know. They just don't know. So
Yeah.
now, like you said, it's kind of like the Clockwork Orange. The eyelids are pinned open and people have to see what's happening. Brandon, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you. You stay safe out there. Okay.
Thanks. Stay safe as well.
Our next guest is co-founder of Black Lives Matter 5280. The creation of Black Lives Matter in 2016 may have been when this moment began to evolve into a movement. Here's Amy Brown. Amy, thanks so much for being here. Great to see you again.
Good to see you, Tamara. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, Amy, you have organized marches, sit-ins, rallies. You've attended and organized vigils to memorialize unarmed people who've been killed by police officers. Something feels different about this moment, I think anyway. How do you feel about what's happening in your city and across cities across the U.S. and really all over the world?
I agree. I do think something feels different. I was hesitant to name that or say that out loud. I didn't want to jinx it for quite some time. I think for fear that the moment would die quickly and people would soon move on. But it definitely seems like more white people, especially more white people than ever, have become awakened to the truths of racism in Denver, the truths of racism in our nation, in our history, in the world. It seems that young people are showing up in streets in a prolonged way that we haven't seen before. So I'm seeing people activated for much longer than I have before, and people who I haven't seen before. And I'm also seeing really shameful tactics in response from the police to these people who are being awakened to our histories in this country with racism.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the new allies that are coming forward. Certainly we've had white allies before, but there's a different set of maybe folks that we wouldn't necessarily have seen in the past. And also Roger Goodell, president of the NFL, when he comes forward and apologizes and wants to do better than the NFL has done in the past. That says a lot when big corporate people who don't have to make any change, are stepping forward. Who knows what his heart really is? If this is maybe a business move, or maybe he really does feel like it's time to change. But nevertheless, that's huge, don't you think?
I don't know, Tamara, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's huge. I think if Roger Goodell wanted to do something huge, he could start very quickly with Colin Kaepernick and doing right by Colin Kaepernick. So statements made by people with huge platforms and billions of dollars, action is quite easy for someone like Roger Goodell. Action is quite easy for someone like Jeff Bezos. These billion-dollar companies who are pledging to stand with Black communities, statements are easy. So I'm really looking to see when and how the action begins, if in fact they're going to let Black voices and Black leaders be at the forefront of those actions, because sure, I suppose it is kind of unprecedented to hear someone like Roger Goodell make the statement he made, but we're way past that. We're way past statements. We're looking for action, and for someone with as little to lose as he has to lose, it's long past time.
You raise a really good point, because obviously actions speak louder than words. You know, I mentioned to somebody that I was this whole moment in time that we're experiencing is leading up to a movement, or maybe they were in the middle of that movement. Somebody asked me, when did this moment start? And I've heard people say maybe really started in this particular moment and moving towards a movement was when Black Lives Matter was formed. Can you talk a little bit about what you went through, the thoughts that went through your head in putting together Black Lives Matter 5280, and why that was important in 2016, right?
2015, yeah.
2015. Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we in Denver were not isolated at all from the national cries that were heard with the murder of Trayvon Martin, the murder of Michael Brown, the murder of Tamir Rice. Many have been shocked to see the treatment of George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd. However, a lot of us, this is one in a very long series of nightmarish videos that we've seen. And in Denver, it was important for us to let the world know we're not isolated from this reality. We're not safe from police terror in Denver. We have a list of victims in Denver who have not found justice, whose families still live in a city where the officers who murdered their loved ones are employed as public servants, no less. So it was very important for us to find a way to channel our energy, our grief, our pain into action. And within the Black Lives Matter global network and within our Black Lives Matter family, we found a way here in Denver to lift up the victims of police terror, like Marvin Booker, like Jesse Hernandez, like Michael Marshall, like Paul Castaway, and so many names that should never have to be named in this way. But it was important for us to lift up those voices as part of the national outcry in that movement.
Right. And you mentioned people will often say, well, you know, they were high or drunk or unemployed or what have you. Not that that justifies somebody being killed for not dimming their lights. But when you look at Breonna Taylor from Louisville, Kentucky, and she's not only in her home, but she was an EMT on the front lines of saving lives with this pandemic. So this notion that, well, you shouldn't have been out anyway, you should have just stayed at home. We're not even safe at home.
Right. That's when I heard the story of our sis Breonna Taylor, as a Black woman, as a mother, I put a post up of, imagine trying to go to sleep at night. Imagine trying to hold your baby in bed, knowing that a no-knock warrant had police kick in her front door to the wrong residence and shoot her 8 times in bed, shoot her 8 times in bed. Imagine trying to go to sleep. So yeah, it really, the murder of Breonna, the murder of Ayanna, that sweet baby, so many years ago, I believe she was 8 years old when Ayanna was murdered at home in her bed because of a no-knock warrant. You know, it's not hyperbole when we say we're not safe anywhere. We're not safe in our cars, in our streets, in our neighborhoods. We're not safe at home in our beds. And that's a shocking reality to try to sit with, let alone sleep with at night. But it is the truth. And I'm I'm heartened that America is learning the story of Breonna Taylor and starting to appreciate the reality of not feeling safe in your home, in your bed.
Of course, we're hearing criticism of the protests that have turned into riots, and people have said violence should not be stopped by more violence. And I know a lot of us have heard this quote from Dr. King recently, that violence is the voice of those who've not been heard. Can you share with me your thoughts about the rioting and looting that's happening across the country?
I'm not here to critique the way that those in pain, those who are grief-stricken, those who are experiencing terror, I'm not here to critique the way they mourn, the way they choose to act in the streets. They have been treated with violence their whole lives. Poverty is violence. Hunger is violence. Policing in America often looks like violence. So it is not for me to come down on people experiencing trauma for the methods that they employ to make their voices heard. If it were my baby, if it were my daughter, if it were my son, if it were my family, I would break and burn everything in sight. That's just the truth. I would break and burn everything in sight. If someone barged into my home with a no-knock warrant and murdered me in my bed like they murdered Breonna Taylor, I know that my friends and family would have a lot to break and a lot to say, and I don't condemn them for that. So I think really we focus on the wrong issue. We focus on the wrong violence. What are the systemic forces of violence that have built up this rage in people where they need to smash something, they need to break something, they need to scream so loud that glass shatters? I understand that. And I certainly won't condemn it. There are business owners in Minnesota who have said, let my store burn until these people get justice. And I really, those people who understand that human emotion, human loss, terror, grief supersedes property damage, supersedes loss of material things. I'm in solidarity with those people. It's not for me to critique the methods. There are agitators out there who do things to get headlines and do things that put actual protesters in danger and put Black people who are grieving in danger. And I certainly don't advocate for those methods, but otherwise I'm not gonna come down on the methods of those who are in trauma and taking to the streets to get change for all of us.
And to underscore your point, it's interesting that often critics of that type of pushback are the same people who were more than okay with Kaepernick being fired and not getting his job back ever, and others who have done peaceful protests like taking a knee and constantly criticized, lost their jobs, maybe even relationships were at risk. So the peaceful protest is criticized and not heard, and very little, if anything, changes. And then you move to like the community is just wanting to take mainstream white Americans, shaking it by their shoulders. Listen to us. This is a real thing. Mm-hmm. And so I understand what you say when it's like, maybe if you didn't hear me when I was kneeling, maybe you'll hear me when the stores are burning down. And again, like you said, it's I'm with you. I'm not here to critique it or place a judgment on it, but I have heard the voices of critique about burning down the Target in downtown Atlanta or other places more or louder than the voices that are outraged by innocent people being killed. And when I say innocent, a headlight out, a tail light out, not dimming your lights when you're passing a police officer. Those are not reasons to lose your life.
Not at all. Not at all. And it really, as much as people have to say about property destruction, about looting, quote unquote, or rioting, quote unquote, I will say, without those, we wouldn't have had as many cameras at these protests as we have. Without those cameras and news coverage, you wouldn't have seen journalists attacked by the police who were sworn to serve and protect. And without all of that coverage, we wouldn't have so many people who were not aware of the truth of violent policing seeing the tactics used. So, cameras follow these flames. These flames have helped bring eyeballs to the problems that many are protesting now. So a lot of our awareness has been raised because of these methods that a lot of people are criticizing.
You have a little one now, a 1-year-old. Tell me, what kind of world do you hope that she grows up in?
Oh, goodness. I hope, oh my goodness, I hope I'm able to create for her, even if it's just our own little insular world, a world where she knows the feeling of freedom, where she can be a child who runs and yells and plays and takes up space and makes her voice heard and can be ridiculous and strange and silly and curious without fear of being reprimanded for daring to take up space, without fear of being reprimanded for daring to be her true self, whatever that turns out looking like. I hope she feels free to explore all the facets of her identity. And if I can just create that world for her in our home, that's a huge victory. I'm fighting the fights I'm fighting now in the hopes that she won't have to. I just want her to experience being a child in the ways Tamir Rice didn't get to be a child. I want her to be able to be a child in the way George Floyd's daughter is being robbed of her childhood now. Those are the things I want for her world, just the freedom of childhood and joy and exploration and weirdness, whatever sorts of weirdness she wants, because that really is privilege.
Right. Absolutely. Amy, thank you for your time. You are just a wealth of information and insight. Is there anything that you'd like to add that you feel like America, white America, all of America, the world needs to hear that they have yet to hear at this point?
Sure. Thank you for allowing me to do so. I invite white America into this conversation. I invite white America into the streets for this fight. We need them in the fight. We can't do this alone. That's been shown for centuries now. And I invite them to stay home also and do the reading about the work that's already been done. Read the historical work about movements before now, movements leading up to now, so that you're clear on the work that's already been done. You're not arriving to a new party. This has been going on for quite some time with people who look like me leading the work. So come to the fight prepared to learn and prepared to follow. I invite you to the fight prepared to mess up, prepare to make mistakes, learn, and come back to the table and do it again. No one is perfect in this fight, so I just invite folks to be ready to learn and listen. And I would really encourage people to find ways to give locally. I know there's a lot of generous donations being made at the national level. I want to assure people that there are in states across the nation and in, I believe, the UK and Canada, there are chapters of Black Lives Matter who could use your direct giving on the ground locally. I encourage people to find local sources to give donations to so that we can really use your generous giving to advance the fight for racial justice in our city, in our state, in ways that will most directly impact the marginalized folks here in Denver, in Aurora, in Green Valley Ranch, and beyond. Those are my asks for the white folks joining this fight.
Great. Thank you. And I appreciate your time so much, and much respect to you, my sister. You take good care of yourself and that little cute one.
Thank you, Tamara. Good to see you again. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, as I mentioned before, we want to provide some information for non-Blacks, that means white folks who want to help in the fight for equity. Well, here's one way. As Amy Brown, co-founder of Black Lives Matter 5280, just mentioned, organizations need you to put your money where your mouth is. So you can help organizations that dismantle systemic racism and police brutality. Next, we hear from Yoal Ghebremeskel, co-founder of Street Fraternity. It's a really awesome organization that works with young men, particularly Africans and African Americans that live in these urban areas. It helps them identify their goals and conquer challenges.
Yoal, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, so great to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
And for folks who don't know what Street Fraternity is, I've produced a couple of stories on you guys. You're amazing. You founded this organization. after you graduated the University of Denver and decided to keep your skills here in the US rather than going overseas and taking your international education overseas with you. This amazing organization does great work to provide resources and a place for young Black men, Africans, and African Americans who typically don't have the opportunities to go someplace to fellowship and have a camaraderie and even get pizza for dinner. So I love it. And you have to invite me back for pizza.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So Yoal, let me ask you, we're talking about this moment that we're having right now, and it feels different in that after the three highly publicized police killings of unarmed Black people, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, there have been rallies, protests, and like I said, even riots, not just here in the US, but across the globe. What do you think this moment means? And more importantly, how are you feeling about this moment?
There's a lot. There's a lot about this moment, and it's a lot to take in for many of us, I believe, and it's a lot to take in for us as an organization because there's a reason that we exist. And as I mentioned to you briefly before we logged on, we don't want to exist. We want to close our doors. Our mission is brotherhood and personal growth for urban young men, any and every young man. And we strategically chose an area of Denver, East Colfax neighborhood, knowing that there's a high need for what is described as disengaged youth. When that's described by academia, it said 16 to 24-year-olds, as I heard recently on the radio, that are not going to school and that don't have jobs. Predominantly, that is going to be in low-income communities. So as I mentioned, strategically, we opened our space in the basement of the Disabled American Veterans with the mission of brotherhood and personal growth for violent young men. Very quickly, we changed our mission to brotherhood and personal growth for urban young men because we saw the high need from this quote-unquote disengaged youth, which I would like to add youth that are at full potential. And so we serve 14 to 25-year-olds that voluntarily participate in our space. And I'm going a little off topic here, but I'm trying to connect it to your question. What we continuously have seen over the years is issues of mental health, of alcohol, school progress, of violence, and importantly, of having a space of belonging and identifying. So that is the work that we do here locally in Denver, in East Colfax neighborhood. We've been there for 7 years. We continue to do work during this crisis of COVID as much as we can with food needs. It is also a food desert in that neighborhood, like many other neighborhoods around the Denver metro area as well. Having said that, we also exist because the mainstream pathway of education to college and or career doesn't work for majority of the demographic that you described, African Americans, Latinos, others who are also immigrants living in the same neighborhood. And I think when I'm saying the same neighborhood that we're in, we can also relate that to other communities around the nation. And so this moment has brought a lot. And even in my personal experience, seeing folks, I'll tell you, just to get into it, my personal experience, I was at the state capitol for a protest on a Saturday, that first Saturday of protest. And I arrived, when you asked me that question, it's very hard to answer. It's mixed emotions. It's happiness, it's sadness, being very happy, and then excited, but then exhausted, and then being very happy and excited and energized and encouraged. And that experience that I had on that Saturday, I'll never forget in my life. These last 3 to 4 weeks, outside of what's happened to the 3 individuals that you mentioned, in our neighborhood, we lost a participant to gun violence. And that was about 3 weeks ago. We also lost another participant because he was involved in violence himself because of the nature of the neighborhood. We lost a participant 5 years ago who was shot by police 16 times, who had no weapon, yes, he was making mistakes. At that current moment, though, they feared him and shot him 16 times. And so fast forwarding to these last several weeks, it's mixed emotions. And I can only relate it to that experience that I had around the Capitol. And folks were circling the Capitol before going out to protest to downtown Denver. And seeing the crowd, the amount of people that were there, the diversity there, and mostly white folks who were also out, I would like to say that, I had those very same mixed emotions. I was happy to see that. At the very same time, I was also asking that question of myself, where have you been? And so while feeling energized and encouraged, I still have those sentiments, but I'm also feeling motivated to keep doing what we're doing and to keep challenging our society to do better. And so I found myself I couldn't even circle one time around the Capitol. I broke down in tears of happiness and sadness. And I'm still trying to make sense out of that with the personal experiences that we've been having in the neighborhood within our organization, and the young adults of all demographics who fit the demographics of what you're describing. I think it's all related, and yeah, it's very tough time in our country.
It's a lot to digest, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot to just sort of wrap your brain around and say you feel this one way or these two feelings. I mean, it's complicated and it's complex.
It is, and I think that we have to educate ourselves. Bringing myself back to that experience at the Capitol, it was very good to see thousands and thousands and thousands of people that Saturday, and not only that Saturday, but for weeks on out. And the protests still are ongoing, and folks maybe have that emptiness inside of them about what can I do, right? What can I do? And yes, maybe it's complex. It's not two sides, but in this day and age too, and seeing what we're seeing, you know, I would bring her back to my personal experience of the young men that I mentioned. When that happened, not only myself, but those around me built even a better understanding of what's happened. Bring it back to George Floyd now, right? And so when I'm seeing those thousands of people, we also have, when I'm saying we, I'm saying all those thousands that were out there that Saturday, they also should have that responsibility and have a responsibility to get out and teach themselves, to get out and reach out to the folks that can educate them. And I only say that, I know you mentioned, you know, my experience at the University of Denver, and after that with street fraternity, and before that, I was also involved just in the community out of passion for playing soccer and coaching soccer and refereeing soccer to the community, and engaging that way and not having to go abroad to have that experience or to help. It was in the back door of where I lived, you know, for 14 years. And then I realized 5 minutes away, I could be doing this. I don't have to go travel around the world. And I bring that back, Tamara, because I didn't learn of the civil rights movement in detail. I didn't learn of Emmett Till in high school or middle school. I learned that at the University of Denver from a course that I chose, from an elective course that I chose. And so going back to the complexity that you were bringing up, if it wasn't for that class that I chose, I wouldn't have had those lessons, right? And then even going further, and I'm still learning, right? Even going further, it wasn't after college because of running to the right person or seeking the right person or seeking the right materials or just personal experience of being in the neighborhoods that you start to learn about redlining. You start to learn about Jim Crow, that you start to learn about the war on drugs, that you start to learn about mass incarceration, and specifically for me, about education funding and the influences of that, because I mentioned those 5 things earlier of mental health issues, alcohol issues, school progress, violence, having a space of belonging and identifying. We have to ask ourselves as a community, as a neighborhood, as a city, as a state here locally, what are the root causes? And I think that maybe the many thousands of folks that I saw and having those emotions that I did, I don't think maybe they understand it at that deeper level. And I'm not claiming that I do. I'm still learning. And so that's my hope. I hope that folks that were out there, you know, because for this movement, I'm seeing it now over this last 2 days, 3 days, I've been getting pessimistic. I'm like, whoa, there's less and less people going out. And so what does that mean? And so I do hope that folks can, in their private time, also educate themselves and reach out to folks to learn more and be active in communities, whether it's through volunteering or contributing in any form or shape, whether it's their sweat or equity or, you know,
Yeah, and I think that's very well said, Yoel. I think that people get to a point where, okay, I've done, 2 weeks of rallying and protesting and demonstrating. Okay, and that's important, and that's huge. And again, that has gone viral, if you will, all over the globe.
Yep.
So now the moment is turning into a movement. And what does that look like? And you've said, basically, to paraphrase, putting your money where your mouth is, and really,
Pretty much.
right? And then, some people even talked about defunding, or maybe they really
I was gonna
mean refunding police departments. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Oh, absolutely. And we're on the same page. I was just thinking about that. There's a lot of conversations that I'm seeing about defund the police and folks having arguments, but again, just don't stick to that one social media post or such. Get deeper within it. And so one thing I like to say is, when folks, I believe, when they're saying, and now the reason the defund the police is, it's not just a term that was coined right this moment or right at this movement. And I'm not claiming to be a person that's been an organizer, but there's many even in our communities who are deeply involved and heavily invested, not only now, but the past year, the past 5 years, the past 10 years, and for generations, asking for direct investment in communities, whether it's education or at the grassroots level, at the community level, or even grassroots organizations. And so when it comes to the defund the police, it's, I mentioned earlier about the war on drugs, the mass incarceration. There's folks talking about criminal justice reform. Dig into it, dig deeper, and understand what it means to have criminal justice reform. Dig deeper when folks are saying defund the police. I'd like to say, putting your money where your mouth is, right? Identify those in your community. There's many folks that have been working in the Denver metro area around criminal justice reform and the other topics that I brought up earlier. And so who are those folks? Search them online and help them and support them. Defund the police is a big thing right now. Folks may be just looking up small little details on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, but get deeper, read into it. Find and identify individuals in the Denver metro area that are experts at the topic. And so for me personally, when folks are saying defund the police, when we're speaking about mass incarceration as an example that I brought up, that affects low-income communities, that affects African-American communities, then let's get down to it and support those communities at the grassroots level, at the organizational level, at the communal level, at the education level. I'll go even a little bit further. Well, let me step back. So when defund the police is coming up, it's about using the budgets of the city in the right places, right? So if studies, let's go back to studies, are showing that a lot of the money that is being placed by cities is going towards mainly administration and salary, I'll call that out right now, and I'm not scared to call that out.
Mm-hmm.
What are the outcomes when grassroots organizations like ourselves and many others in community, whether in Denver or around the nation, are being challenged and asked consistently over the years? What are your outcomes? What are your outputs? We have to prove ourselves every single day, whether it's through the grants, whether it's through the site visits. And so the question is, when we're saying defund the police, if such high percentage of a city's budget is going towards that, public safety, can y'all show us your outcomes?
That's
Can
right.
y'all show us your impact? And so along with that, I'd like to make one more point. And so it's about asking ourselves as a society, when we're investing this money, what impact are we having? Can we have higher impact knowing the issues that we have in the community? Who's able to address them and have better impact? And I do believe those leaders, those community organizations, those teachers that are in the schools, that are in the community will have better impact if they can find those sources of funding that is being placed by the city towards the police, so that could be rerouted. The last point I wanted to make is whether it's foundation funding or state funding also, and even with that, putting your money where your mouth is, there's bills that are going to be coming up related to this conversation that we're having. And so I do hope those thousands of people who are out there marching and who will continue to march, when it comes to that time, dig into your pocket and help the community out, the African community out, African American community specifically, and number one.
Well said. Yoal, Thank you. You've raised some really great points, and I hope that people can take this information and our conversation and again put their money where their mouth is and really hold police departments accountable and show those outcomes that nonprofits are always required to come up with before they're getting funding, before they get funded. Thank you so much for your time. Great to see you. You stay safe out there, my friend.
That's all. And last thing, I think that's what this movement is telling us is it's holding all of us accountable moving forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yoal, thank you for really breaking down what is meant by defunding police departments across the country. It's really about holding them accountable and meeting deliverables and expectations. The divisive national debate on race and policing is at a boiling point right now, but it's been smoldering and simmering across the country for many centuries. You can expect from Moment to Movement to bring you voices that have long been ignored and often negatively impacted by systemic racism. I hope you heard something that inspired you, something that moved you. That's all the time we have for this premiere broadcast of From Moment to Movement. Keep the conversation going with us online by going to pbs12.org, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Tamara Banks. We'll see you next time.
From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.